I work as crisis case manager, which means I respond to folks having mental health concerns, short-term crisis basis. So that would be someone experiencing possibly suicidal thoughts, self-harm thoughts, homicidal thoughts, delusions, extreme anxiety, something that's happening to them in their lives that they're not functioning normally.
What we initially get over the radio is someone's at this address and they're threatening suicide and maybe a method, and that's about it. And then it's up to us as officers to respond to that scene, and if it's something where there's already a need for medical care, they said that they've cut their wrist or something, then of course the fire department and the ambulance service will respond to take care of that, but they'll still wait for us to clear the scene and make sure everything's secure.
Very often these are situations that the officer is called to something that's a crisis, that some conflict is going on that has already boiled over, I guess I would say, and the officer is going to have to address that. So they may be walking into kind of a hot button kind of situation. They want to try to calm things as much as they can and assess what they're really dealing with.
The police department contacts us if an officer arrives on a scene somewhere and suspects there's a mental health issue going on related to the crisis. We respond to kind of be police backup or to help if they need someone to come out and talk to folks, kind of try to help figure out what's going on and make sure they get the services that they need.
But if I've spoken with somebody and they've articulated that, yes, I want to kill myself, I'm going to do it tonight, and this is how I'm going to do it, and they have the means to carry that out, or they've actually taken some action towards that, whether it be overdose or some type of self-injury, at that point, typically what I will do, if it's not a medical situation where they have to be transported to the ambulance, I'll talk to them, explain the process to the person, and that generally de-escalates the situation, where instead of whether they know it or not, if I've reached the point where I believe that yes, they need to go through the involuntary committal process, they're going to go with me.
When law enforcement bring an individual to Valeo's Mental Health Center Crisis Services, the crisis clinician's primary responsibility is to assess that individual's mental health symptoms and try to get an understanding of what their treatment needs might be. We try to work with the law enforcement officer to get a better idea of the circumstances that led them to bring the person in to be seen, to try to understand their risk factors such as safety to themselves, to others, to property. We may ask a law enforcement officer to stay with us during the interview process, both as a safety to the person and the safety to others that may be working with the individual.
Our job as police officers is safety. That's the whole point of the laws, the way they're set up for involuntary committal, is to make sure that that person is safe. And we can't help them get the help they need unless we can provide a safe environment to first make contact with them, assess what their needs are, and then get them to the services that they need. If we don't have a safe scene, we can't get to the point where we're talking about the reasons why they decided that they wanted to hurt themselves or someone else.
Part of a crisis case manager's job is to help facilitate the screening process. If someone was an imminent threat of danger to harm to themselves or other people, possibly we would ask officers if they were uncooperative to help us transport them safely to a location to be screened.
And at this time, and the other officers there with me, we go ahead and explain they need to stand up. We'll take them to custody, put them in handcuffs, and at that time we'll perform a search of the person to make sure they don't have any weapons or pills or anything they can use to injure themselves or someone else. Take them for a ride over to wherever it is they need to go for the next stage of the process, which beyond medical screening is a screening by a Valeo screener for what services would best meet their needs at that time.
If they decide they don't need a hospitalization, we would usually try to contract for safety on the scene and then possibly do a referral for crisis case management services to start within 24 hours. Safety plan basically is a piece of paper that states, I, client's name, agree not to harm myself either accidentally or purposefully or direct any harm towards others before contacting a service provider of some kind. Then it'll list warning signs for someone to identify their own personal signs to themselves that they may be needing to seek crisis services. The next section of the safety plan has coping skills. So a list of things people can do when they start to feel the warning signs coming on to try to decrease crisis symptoms and eliminate the need for services.
When an individual is seen, they are treated on a case-by-case basis. Their circumstances are unique. We try to see what can be done to help them in the least restrictive environment. If it's a situation where the person doesn't require inpatient psychiatric hospitalization or admission to a state hospital level of care, the person can receive services directly after the interview. It might be in the week following the screen.
Crisis case managers generally work short-term with people, really just stabilizing crisis symptoms and making sure for safety, and then referring to further outpatient mental health services as needed. If they're willing to seek help, then they can do a voluntary admission to a hospital. If they are not, it's possible that involuntary admission would need to get started.
When it appears that someone is seeking voluntary inpatient treatment to a psychiatric unit, it means that they know that they have some insight about their mental health problems. They know that they need mental health treatment. It appears that they have the capacity to sign in, that they know what they're getting into, that they're able to participate in the treatment programs.
And it's up to us to provide a very clear picture as to what led us as a police officer to take them into custody. We need to be able to tell the Valeo screener what's going on that made it necessary for us right at that time to take the action we took. We also need to do a good job of documenting that, because part of the involuntary committal process eventually can lead to a court hearing, and we need to be able to explain to the judge why we took this action.
Once we get that paperwork, what we'll do is we'll contact the petitioner. If it's law enforcement, we'll try to make arrangements for the officer to come to our office here and review the petition. We draft the petition, but we use the information that the officer has given to us on their worksheet. And then we'll sit down with the officer and say, this is what you've stated. Are you in agreement to it? Because basically what they're doing is that they're making the representation to the court that based upon their observations, their personal knowledge, they believe the person is mentally ill and should be subject to involuntary commitment.
First off, that person has to have a diagnosable mental illness. Second, there has to be evidence that they are in imminent danger to themselves, to others, to property. This may mean that they are actively suicidal, actively homicidal, or that they're not taking care of their basic needs to where they appear that they could be a risk of harm to themselves. So there's two criteria. Another criteria is that they have to demonstrate that they do not have the capacity to make informed treatment decisions. Either they don't understand the need for treatment, their mental status is impacted to where they could not participate voluntarily in treatment, or they think they don't have a mental illness and don't need treatment.
That's basically what you're going to have to decide. So is the person mentally ill? Is the person lacking capacity to make their own decisions concerning treatment? And are they likely to cause harm to themselves or others?
One rule-out criteria that we have to use for involuntary hospitalizations is if the person is primarily presenting with substance abuse problems, if they have a cognitive disorder like dementia, if they have an intellectual disability or developmental disability, if those are the primary kind of things sticking out, that is a reason to not send someone or be committed for involuntary hospitalization, that those needs need to be addressed in a different realm or a different kind of treatment.
We're really at the door. There's a kind of a double gatekeeper. One is that with our state hospitals, the local mental health agency makes the first determination whether somebody's going to go to the hospital or not. I don't have the authority, for example, to commit somebody to the state hospital if our local mental health agency has not first approved it.
Every assessment is individualized because no two clients will present the same way, and their circumstances are usually very different. We try to do a thorough assessment. We may complete a mental health screening form to determine whether the person is safe to return home with supports or whether they need a more intensive level of care like the hospitalizations.
Clients only need a crisis screen if they are trying to access a hospitalization or possibly to come to the residence as a hospital diversion program.
Basically, there is a continuum of care when we try to think about what kind of services will best meet the person's treatment needs. At the lowest level, least restrictive environment, the person may just need a referral for outpatient services such as individual therapy or medication management. But sometimes the person needs more supports in the community, that some of those supports or the lack of supports is the reason why they need increased mental health services. In that case, we might facilitate a referral for crisis case management, where someone works with the person over perhaps a period of 30 days to provide support to them, help them access community resources, to try to improve their mental health symptoms and their risk of harm.
Anytime a referral for crisis case manager takes place, it's the crisis case management team responsibility for someone to respond within 24 hours to set up what we call first contact, and that is just, hey, this is who I am. It's been requested that I come out and follow up with you about whatever's going on and determine, do you want to meet with me? Do you want to access the services I can offer? And then to set up a treatment plan and go from there.
But sometimes the person might need more support than a once-a-week meeting with a crisis case manager. So in that case, we might refer them for either some in-home or out-of-home supports. In-home supports are we would do something like crisis attendant care, which might provide an hour or two of nightly in-home support to the person, perhaps when it's the roughest time for them. Just having that daily support in place and trying to work on coping skills to keep them out of a more restrictive environment. There are times when the person may not be safe to remain in their home during this period of crisis. And in that case, we may utilize Valeo's Crisis Residential Program. This is a short-term residential program, perhaps 1 to 3 days, depending on the severity of the person's symptoms. It's something that's staffed 24 hours. There are psychosocial groups during the day. There is 24-hour staff supervision to try to help the person over the rough patch because they don't have the resources they need to stabilize on their own.
The second step is the hearing process. But whether that person is going, once they get there, is going to stay 90 days or may be released tomorrow is mostly going to determine on what the doctor's evaluation is and whether this person can be released.
Then it's set for what we call a TCO, a temporary custody hearing. And that's typically 48 hours or 2 business days after the petition's been filed. And that's a not a very complicated process. While the rules of evidence do not necessarily apply, we still ask basic questions to the petitioner, which the law enforcement officer, and also to the screener. The goal for the TCO is to present sufficient evidence to the judge to make a determination that the person should remain at Osawatomie.
One of the things that we see is that people get treatment, get stabilized, they're taking medicine, so they're released and they're back in the community. What too often happens is that they will see themselves as, well, you know, I'm feeling better, and so I must not need this medicine anymore, so they quit taking it. Well, then they begin to deteriorate, and back in the same process again. So if they have prescribed medication, for instance, then my suggestion is that they take it and not quit taking it until a doctor has told them that they are no longer in need of it. That would be one critical factor. Another is some kind of ongoing support. People who are just out on their own don't do very well. And I think that's where agencies like Valeo and others can help support them in the community.
The times that we've run into some difficulties when we do not have contact from the officer. And what happens is that we simply can't file that petition. So, of course, you can see the dilemma. We have a person, let's say, who's suicidal, needs some attention, some that is medically. What happens? The person could be released, discharged from Osawatomie when they're in a very situation where they're a danger to themselves or others.
If we don't do a good job on any of those steps, we may not get the help that that person needs to them in a timely fashion, and that's our job. So that'd be my overriding thing is safety. The next thing is make sure we communicate exactly why we took the actions we took to the people involved in the process so they can do their job properly.
Our experience with officers, again, is that they've been well trained, they're willing to work with us, and they recognize the seriousness of the situation.
I think it's really exciting that crisis case managers are able to work with officers on the scene, because I think a lot of times it's kind of unique that we may be able to help and provide needed services to folks and eliminate maybe unnecessary criminal charges or arrests. And so it's a really exciting opportunity. Myself, my biggest concern is safety when I arrive at the scene, that the officer's not leaving too soon, making sure that I'm comfortable in that environment with that person and able to complete a safety plan.
The key, though, that I believe with our office is maintaining that communication with law enforcement. Just saying, we're here to help, call us, let's work together. Can't even think of any situation in which an officer has refused to do anything. It's maybe a miscommunication, and that happens sometimes, but we'll make sure that a person is not released without contacting Osawatomie and say, hey, we have an issue here that we need to get resolved. Can you file it in Miami County? But we would prefer to do it here to make sure that we're on top of it. But it takes a collaborative effort, and we've been very pleased.